Hi, I'm Jeremy, or Dr. J,
I'm Ronnie West.
and this is Good Parents, Good Children.
Parent like your kid's life depends on it. So I have this neighbor who's from Russia, really great guy, super nice. And I was just really curious about his thoughts on this Ukraine-Russia crisis. And so I asked him about it. And he said, I'm on the side of Russia, I'm on the side of Putin. And he had these reasons about Ukraine and Russia that I didn't fully understand. I only got to speak to him for a little while. But I asked him, I'm like, well, yeah, isn't Putin evil though, right? He's a bad guy. And my Russian buddy neighbor, he says, well, yeah, but leaders have to be rough. They have to be tough. They might have to do evil things from time to time. You can't find good leaders that aren't that way. And this was sort of his Machiavellian argument, right? And it really struck me. There were a couple of lessons for me in this. One is I do believe that Putin is selfish and is putting himself first. That doesn't mean that he's not putting Russia second and doing things for Russia that the Russians think are good for Russia. So, I mean, I don't know what to make of that beyond that, but we can't count on people that we might think are mostly good not supporting him, even though we are feeling confident that he's mostly evil. So there's a lot of nuance with this. And again, I'm not saying that justifies Putin. And I'm not saying that it's good to have that opinion, but it's worth thinking more about how that can happen, where, you can have a leader that you think is evil, but they're pulling things off for your country that you think might be good. And so then, I mean, I think it's better to not support them, right? We should be pursuing virtue and competence, even if a leader is doing things we think are good for our country. We should want them to only do it in a way that is moral and justified.
Well, funny enough, he could be competent. This whole thing could be a great demonstration of competence. It's a success.
Well, even if he made an error, I think Putin is a competent guy. Competent people make errors. So even if it turns out that there was some errors in the timing, or he misjudged some things, that doesn't mean that he's not normally competent. It would just mean that he took a gamble that didn't pay off the way he thought it would.
Well, I also think this comes back to your earlier point about judging actions or judging behaviors versus judging people. We've been declaring Putin as evil, and I think that's rightly so, because we have kind of a preponderance of evidence. But I think especially as we speak to children, we want to say Putin invaded Ukraine. He chased people out of their homes. That's bad. Right? And to our children, again, we want to say, because they'll have a story like this. Do you remember when your brother or sister took your thing and broke it? Do you remember how that made you feel? It's like Putin's taking away people's houses, and there's kids over there. So it's the action behavior, but it's also, this is very surprising for me to learn that there's a Russian or Russian American that's in support, openly in support, because you were also saying earlier, it's difficult to tell at times who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And I was going to say Putin is bad, but that doesn't mean Russia is bad.
That's right.
I think Russia is probably good. And again, it's hard to know exactly what to think or know about this. But I encounter many news sources that say much of the Russian people is not in support of these annexations and invasions.
Well, and even if they are in support of this specific military action, and that's and we're correct, that's an error and evil if that is the case, which I think it probably is. If that's what's going on, that doesn't mean they're not great people in a lot of other ways, right? So I don't want to talk about the Russian people in a negative way when if I can avoid it. I don't want to talk about Russia as a country in a negative way if I can avoid it. But so then you talk about the people that are making the choices. And I mean, now this does put the Russian people in a really bad bind, though, because if they're wanting to feel patriotic and they're wanting to be loyal to their country, then they've got to figure out how to do that while their country's doing something that we strongly believe is very evil. So should they stand against it? If so, in how direct of a way? And what kind of risk does that put their family in? And the reason why this is important is because this happens to a lot of people throughout history. They're asked to do things for their country or in their job that we believe are very wrong things. And I think the answer is you need to not do that. But you also need to have if it looks like that's a possibility for you in your lifetime or in the near future, you've got to have a plan. How am I going to avoid doing things that I think are evil when asked by my job or by my country? How am I going to avoid doing it? Do I run beforehand because I predict it? That might be the right call. Or do I openly rebel or sabotage the system because it's become so corrupt? I mean, if we're pursuing virtue and competence, that means virtue comes before country. I mean, I like being patriotic and I love America, but doing what's right has to come before any kind of patriotism or my liking America. And even if I think America's been a great country at many points in its history, that doesn't mean that's going to continue. I mean, and it doesn't mean that everything a leader in America wants to do is always good.
Well, and
there comes a point where you have to disobey to be good.
Well, that's right. And this is also, what do we do when those in power over us are trying to get us to do things that are wrong? It's so common in children to have those friends who are older teens. Those will typically be the first people who are going to offer them drugs. And yeah, one thing to do is like monitor your children's friend group to make sure to hopefully those people aren't around. But it's probably going to happen at some point, and you want to have trained them to, hey, what do you do when somebody who you look up to, who you respect a lot, is trying to get you to do something wrong? There's no doubt, there are so many soldiers in the Russian army who are now over in Ukraine who probably don't support exactly what they're doing, yet allowed themselves to get in a position to do something that we think, again, objectively is wrong.
Right. And I mean, some of those guys, what they're going to doing is, shooting over the heads of their enemies and trying to not actually hit anybody and being less effective in this. And I don't know what the right, I think that's worth thinking about, primarily just knowing that these sorts of things are a possibility, and then look at your life and see what are areas where people of authority could ask me to do something that would violate my conscience, or could they put me in the position to use force and threat of force against people, to take their stuff, to take their freedom, things that are clearly wrong. And then and also, what are the stories they're going to tell me to try to convince me that I don't need to feel bad about it? Because they will have stories, right? They always have a story to tell you to make it so that you don't have to feel bad about whatever evil thing they want you to do is. That's how it's worked in the evil communist regimes. That's how it's worked in, Nazi totalitarian, other totalitarian regimes. They always have a story about why what they're doing is good and necessary. So you have to have the mental discernment and wherewithal and maybe planning ahead to be able to combat that story internally, and and then have a plan on how to say no.
Ronnie, this is the biggest thing that we need to be teaching our children. It's be confident if you know something that you know it. Talking about just bedrock stuff like invasions are probably evil. Kicking people out of their houses is probably bad. Because you're absolutely right, and we're even seeing it in some of that propaganda Russian media. Now they're being told, the Russian media sources are being told, saying anything that conflicts with the government is lawless and is subject to imprisonment. And so for our kids to understand the plight of the Russian child is, what do you do if you're being told, if you see something and you're being told you don't see it?
Right. You're being told right is wrong and wrong is right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, in this, there's several things with this that are interesting. One, I think this is really important. This fits almost with like the whole world peace thing. And that is, leaders are normally weak and or evil. That's the norm. So we need to remember our leaders are normally, to some degree, and not nearly as competent as we need them to be. They're weak, they're not competent, they're not going to do what they need to do, and or they're selfish and evil. Rarely are you going to have leaders that are sufficiently virtuous and selfless and good and but also virtuous and have integrity and do what's right. That's not common. It's not common. So keep that in mind when you're voting for people or supporting political movements, is realize you support a political movement. You want this thing to happen. Okay, maybe it's a good thing you want to have happen. But remember, it will be run by people, and those people will normally be, to some degree, incompetent and given to selfishness and making mistakes. So if you give them the power to do a lot, there's a good chance they'll do a lot of not so great stuff. That's just I think that's a principle that people should understand.
We have a few world leaders on the stage right now that are pretty interesting to us. There's President Zielinski. Now, you've talked with me before about perhaps he was set up with intention of being an Eastern Europe puppet for the Ukraine state. And if you look at his actions now, which are in many ways not what the West is telling him to do admirably, not what the West is telling him to do, doesn't look puppeted. He stuck around in Kyiv, and it seems like, in terms of his example, the population is responding, is standing up, and has fought back the Russian force with very little military capability to speak of. Just an amazing response in terms of standing up for values of freedom and individual property.
Right. It's like, I don't need to know whether whether there was some kind of problems with his election, or if he was put in there by, European powers or Western powers. And I don't know anything about that at all. I've heard different people mention that might be the case. And I guess that was something that Russia had a problem with, was this idea that I guess the leadership of Ukraine prior to this was sort of friendly to Russia. And then now this guy who's not very Russians, friendly to the West, has been there for a while. Fine. Like it seems too difficult to trust anything along those lines too intensely. But what does seem to be the case is he is stuck around in a very dangerous place and has been a very good, brave leader in that moment and in that way. So since I can tell that's the case,
right,
I can say if it's true that Putin is murdering and poisoning his opposition, that's evil. I can say that's evil. And if President Zielinski, if that's how you say his name, I forget, but if he is stuck around in the capital city, and in spite of bombings and risk of kidnapping and death and all of this, well, that's brave, that's courageous, and that's going to give his country more bravery and courage. And it seems like that's what's happening, is they're really resisting in a very admirable way. So, I like to focus on the things I can know. If I can know sticking around and fighting hard for your homeland, that takes boldness and courage and sacrifice. And boldness and courage and sacrifice are way is really, really good. Side note, every single spy movie I have ever seen has taught me that you pronounce that city's name as Kiev.
Yeah.
And it started irking me so much when I started hearing everybody's pronouncing Kyiv, Kyiv, Kyiv. And it's like, what in the world happened? What happened to Kiev? And then I had to look it up. And I guess Kiev was the traditional Russian way of pronouncing it. And so since it's it's a Ukrainian country, it's a Ukrainian city, and the correct Ukrainian way to pronounce it is Kyiv. We are saying Kyiv. That's fine. It's good. But I kind of miss Kiev because it just has this cool ring to it. But it's Kyiv. But I
do too.
Side note.
Thanks for setting me straight on that. That's how do you talk to Jeremy Dale about the Ukraine-Russia conflict? Some of our other kind of important leaders on the stage is our opposition party leader, former President Trump, still has quite the global presence. Now, I'm very much against a lot of what he stands for, because I just find him on a personal level to be morally repugnant. Some of what we have seen out of him now is he was oddly prophetic about what might happen if Biden were in office. He seemed to kind of have like a buddy thing with Putin. Like, some of his aim was, hey, I'll kind of trick him into thinking we're friends. And comment if you like, but kind of more important for our discussions now about how do we understand this conflict has been current President Joe Biden. He told Putin that if you invade, then we're going to put sanctions on you. Meanwhile, it was pretty available information to all of us that Putin was strengthening Russia against economic sanctions. And so then he seems to have taken that as license to, well, sure, I'm going to go ahead and invade. You've just assured me that the NATO allied forces are not going to respond.
Right, right. I hesitate to support anybody too much because it just, they're too complicated and convoluted. But, as far as my preference is to judge specific behaviors or whatever they say their philosophy is, and then how well they follow through on it. So, with Biden, his administration in multiple clips were saying the sanctions were a preventative measure. They were meant to avoid the conflict. And then right after the conflict, Biden came out and said, oh, everybody knows, these weren't meant to be stopping the invasion. These weren't going to be preventative. And it's like, your people just said these were preventative like a week ago. How can you so those sort of like obvious, like he wasn't exaggerating, wasn't hyperbole. They said one thing and then they said something completely different. And it's like, okay, so like what kind of game are we playing here? And something else that was weird about that was there was a clip in 1997 where Biden said that NATO was, what he said was if there was NATO expansion in the Baltics, that would create a lot of tension with Russia. And I think he kind of implied that could lead to aggression or something like more significant. Like if there was going to be some significant negativity and problems with Russia, it would be expansion of NATO in the Baltics. So, and I don't remember where the Baltics are. I'm not on top of my geography, but my impression was that was pretty, that's cool. He knew that perceived expansion of NATO would be a potential war starter with Russia. And then now it just seems like they've forgotten that this was a potential problem. I don't think that's an excuse for what Putin's done at all. It seems like he has lots of options beyond stealing people's homes and murdering people. But if you know that sort of thing is going to be a potential instigator of violence, then don't act like you don't know it, right? Don't act like you don't know what you're doing. That rubs me the wrong way. Like there's something's going on with all that I don't understand, is what it seems to me.
Well, how do you speak to your kids? It has to be, if you make a mistake, say so.
Yes.
If you make a mistake and you go back and immediately say, oh, that's not what I said, that's not what I meant, that's lying, and it ruins you as a credible source. And
right.
And kids naturally know this because they do it. Because kids show up as natural liars. Just last night,
lines like magic, right? I can change the fabric of reality through these magic words. I can have my cake, I can eat my cake, I can do them at the same time.
Well, and there are those, and this may even be most of us, who are just itching to believe. Like I need my guy to be strong, so I'll believe this stuff that he's saying. Just like my dad, I need my daddy to believe that that I didn't take my sister's dollhouse. Well, then I get to keep it. Then I get to keep living in this reality. The tear down of virtue is so costly, but it's cumulative, and it's
you pay interest on the debt it creates.
It's a cascading effect.
Yeah.
I think this is some of what we're going to be seeing from both Biden and Putin. I think we can tell our kids about this. If you're a president who visibly lies one time, then you're probably like all the other presidents. But once we get to see it again and again and again, it's like that erosion of trust is so great. Even with Putin, if he murders one time, but then he murders again and again, if he annexes one time, but then he invades again and again, and that's where we're at this point, that we're able to look at the case for behaviors and start making inferences into character. And that's what's really dangerous.
Yeah. And I think that there might be a relationship between dishonesty and perceived weakness, because Biden says, hey, this measure is preventative. And then he says, oh, that was never meant to be preventative, right? Well, the military leaders on the other side are seeing this, and they're like, this guy, you can't trust him. Who knows what who knows it? He's weak. He doesn't have any teeth. It's all bark. And so, yeah, we can't trust because there's a clear honesty issue where I'm just saying whatever I need to say to try to get the reaction I want, which is dangerous. Right. But it's a kind of dishonesty that, it's like a kind of, you can have a leader that's not honest, but they're threatening. So, other powers will not want to mess with them because they see them as a viable threat. That's possible. But this particular kind of dishonesty to me seems like it's a sign of weakness. Like it's a sign like, okay, I can take advantage of this, right? Is how I think a strong but selfish, evil leader of another country might perceive that to try to take advantage. I think it put Ukraine in a bad spot, and it's putting a lot of other countries in a bad spot. And there's a reason, I guess there's also a reason why we talk about virtue and competence together. They're not the same. So we split them out because they are different from one another, but they are also related. And weakness is part of incompetence. Okay. It's ineffectual. You're not able to get done what you need to get done. I mean, that's an incompetence is what's happening with weakness. Okay. But it's also related to not pursuing virtues appropriately. If you pursue virtues appropriately, competence, generally speaking, can come with it, right? You're honest, you know who to trust, you know how to be discerning, you're courageous, you don't let fear get in the way of doing what you need to do. You're diligent, so you're working hard and you're practicing the things you need to do. Well, if you do those things and other virtues, then your competence is improving. So a decrease in competence is often coming from a giving in to temptation and doing things you shouldn't be doing anyway that are not virtuous. And so those are more lessons, we can share with our kids. And if this, as this Ukraine-Russia stuff comes up, I think.
Well, Ronnie, how about I ask you to go back and tell me a bit about this idea of certainty and unearned certainty. Let's do that, and then let's see if we got some bottom lines for kids.
Okay. Okay, so let me put it, okay, I'm going to put it to you this way first. This is something that was occurring to me about this, and that is that people who are lying, they're being dishonest, and beyond that, they want you, and this is another way of saying the same thing, but this is important. They want you to believe something that's not true. Okay, they want you to see things in a way that is not quite fitting with reality. That's quite it. Right? Okay. Yeah. If that's the situation, one of the things that they want to do is they want to make things that are ambiguous, certain, and clear. And they want to make things that are clear and certain, ambiguous. And once they have done that, then they can confuse you, or they can give you the script that says things are a certain way. So it's a way to engage in the gaslighting and the lying and the dishonesty and propaganda to put you where they want you to be.
Okay. So our examples then, and just to interact with this, best we can possibly tell, multiple information sources, Putin invaded Ukraine and that was aggressive. But then he has a version of the story with, well, this is historically Russian territory, and we're reclaiming some of our homeland. That's his version. It's taking something certain and making it ambiguous. We take some, and then on the other hand, you can have Biden who's saying we're going to put in preventative economic sanctions, and then after they're ineffective, he says, well, we never said these were actually going to do anything. It's taking something certain again and making it ambiguous. So carry on. Just wanted to put some concrete to the bones there.
Yeah. And another example was, early on in Biden's presidency, he got rid of not the Nord Stream, it was the pipeline from Canada.
Oh, the Keystone XL. Oh,
yeah. Right. So he got rid of that.
He said we didn't need that oil. We were going to import. Right. And well, actually, we were going to go green, kind of ambiguously go green.
Go green, right. But what he said was, we're going to get rid of it. And he said, that's not going to hurt us economically.
That's right.
Then he said, we're going to cut off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia in order to hurt them economically. Now, maybe those aren't totally maybe there's reasons why those aren't perfectly parallel. Maybe there's a reason why one won't hurt us economically and the other one will hurt them economically. But it just sounds so shady. It's like, getting rid of a pipeline over here won't hurt us. Getting rid of their pipeline over there will. And it's like, the truth is whatever I need it to be at the moment in order to get what I need at the moment.
All right, I think you have brought us back to the bottom line. No matter how many conversations we have, we always come back to honesty being the first virtue. What do we tell our children about the Russia-Ukraine conflict? And that's that if you're a leader, you have to be honest. If you're a citizen, you have to seek honesty. And that's true for us, and that's true for the Russians and the Ukrainians. And not only that, you have to be cautious about who you trust in a free press. You have to be conscious about who you trust in an autocratic press.
Yeah, so there's this piece about honesty, which is related to the virtues of faith and humility. So faith as a virtue has a lot to do with trusting when it is reasonable. You have good enough to discern, and discernment is related to this as well. So you have enough discernment and wisdom to know when and who to trust, right? And then you act out that trust if it's rational and reasonable. Humility allows you to change who you trust, right? Like right now, I trust this source. They seem reasonable to me. So I trust them, but you're humble enough to realize they could be wrong sometimes, or I could be very wrong and I shouldn't have trusted them. They weren't nearly as reputable. They shouldn't have been treated as reputable as I treated them, right? And you're willing to back off. So you need enough faith and discernment to pick who to trust and then to trust them the way that you ought to. Have enough humility to change your mind if necessary. And then you be honest so that people can trust you. And there's a lot of other virtues, but if you pursue those and the people that are around you are pursuing them as they're able, then you can get closer to knowing what you need to know and acting on it. And so there's a reason why honesty, I think, is such an important virtue. And it's because I think that we all ought to be in a pursuit of truth where we're trying to find out what's real and how we ought to behave and what we need to do. And whenever you are being dishonest, you're stealing that from people. You're in the way of the goal of life to a degree. And so you need to not do that. You need to help people with that by telling the truth. And you get in the way of it yourself, because when you lie, you're just, there's self-lying in there and there's self-deception, and you're getting in the way of your own pursuit of what is good in life. And so that's why I was saying that about don't embrace unearned certainty. Certainty feels great, but it's cocky, it's arrogant. Now, sometimes you can be certain. I'm not preaching against all certainty. I'm not saying,
but rarely, in fact, but rarely can you be fully certain.
Right. There's degrees of certainty, right? And then you need to be humble within the degrees of certainty. And how do you earn certainty? Well, you earn it through evidence and through both, sort of philosophical deductive evidence and scientific inductive evidence, and trusting the right sources, because I can't verify the scientific evidence that is, if people say things to me about how physics works or other scientific topics or economics or whatever, they reference studies that I don't have the vocabulary to fully comprehend. I can't get past the paywall of the journal. So I just have to choose who to trust well.
Yeah.
And you didn't careful about that.
You didn't do the studies yourself either.
Yeah, even if I did, even if I was an economist and I was reading economic articles, I still have to trust that the people that did it are competent enough to have done it right and trustworthy enough to have done it in an ethical way that wasn't going to skew the results. And that's true for every, the softest of sciences and the hardest of sciences. If the person doing the research is unethical or incompetent, then it can mess up the information, and I can't verify it. So really the point of all that is choose who you're going to trust carefully and be wise about it, which takes discernment and faith, and is part of why we need to be honest. So we don't want to sort of have certainty that we didn't buy appropriately with evidence and deduction. And one of the ways to think about that is Okay, so part of what we're talking about with this whole war in Ukraine and Russia thing, we're talking about virtue and whatnot, and honesty,
Mhm.
is how do we figure out what the truth is? How do we know what we know?
Yeah,
And we alluded to this with our examples of some stuff with Biden and Putin and what was going on with all that.
sure.
And that is inconsistency, right?
Ah,
Internal inconsistency is a great way to determine that something is amiss. Okay. If you find within yourself that you're acting as if two things are true that can't be true, well, then there's something dishonest happening inside of you that would be wise for you to confront that and correct it. And if you see it in other people, then there's some degree of dishonesty. Now, maybe they're lying to themselves. So they're telling you the truth as they see it, but they're wrong and they're lying to themselves. So the truth as they see it is incorrect. So it's in good faith, right? Like they're doing it in good faith, but it's an error. There's other times where it's not in good faith. They know the truth and they're deceiving, purposefully. But either way, if you see inconsistencies within themselves, that's a good way to tell there's something wrong and we need to shift who we're trusting, shift who we have faith in,
mhm.
or change what we're believing.
So I've
Yeah.
got 5 virtues you brought up while you were speaking just then. This is going to be my sign off. 5 virtues and then 1 bonus. So we've got faith. That's who and when to trust. We need to trust people who keep saying the same thing. That's evidence of consistency. And we see that things that they say match reality. That's evidence of credibility. And do I keep trusting? That's evidence of humility. If I find that my beliefs don't match reality, or the people that I'm trusting don't match reality, I have to have the humility to change. That's also honesty. As more information becomes available, I have to have the willingness to change my position and not to kind of dig in to my existing thoughts. 4 is respect, which is don't take stuff that isn't yours. Again, there's a lot of nuance in this war, but there's a lot of simplicity, actually, which also applies to bravery. Number 5, speaking against those who are lying and cheating and stealing. We're not trying to go beyond what we know or what we can know. But when it looks like there's abject evil being committed, it's the virtuous person's duty to stand against that, which brings us to our bonus, wisdom, which is the application of all these virtues and lets you make good decisions.
Yeah. So, okay. So before I sign off, I have a couple things that you were saying that make me want to mention these. One is, be okay with nuance. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
when liars want you to make what is certain ambiguous and what is ambiguous certain,
Mm-hmm.
embrace the nuance, embrace the lack of knowledge, the complexity. They want to make things simple. This is another way to put it. They want to make what is simple complex. They want to make what is complex simple.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We want to embrace nuance so that when there is complexity and nuance, we can accept that. And if something isn't complex, then don't act like it is. Like, we need to figure out the truth about those things and not let people be tricky with us on that. And that'll help us get closer to the truth and be humble about what we believe. Another piece, and I think this is a good place for me to sign off because I think it's very hopeful. There's a lot, I don't understand everything that's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Chances are whoever is watching this doesn't either, and being humble about that is good. And we don't need to go telling our kids things in a way like we have more confidence than we should have.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that is useful with this is when there's great evil and there's, a terrible war going on, there's a lot of theft and murder and violence and just really bad stuff. There's also people who make major sacrifices. There are people that are just incredible examples of heroism and virtue, even if they're not virtuous in every way, but they do something that's really impressive. They save lives, they put themselves in harm's way, they sacrifice a lot of their own personal wealth and safety to improve other people's situation. And that's something that I think that we can see some of during this time. And if you find yourself in catastrophe and horrible situations like this, there's a lot of suffering, or war is coming to you or your country, or horrible things are coming to you and your family, The answer is not hopefully to be paralyzed in fear or to turn, or to steal from people because you say to yourself, you know what, I need this more than you do, so I'm going to take it, and you embrace that lack of virtue. Don't use crisis as an excuse to embrace doing what's wrong. Instead, use it as a chance to be the hero for somebody, to embrace virtue.
That's right.
What's right. And that's a lesson that we need personally. Virtue is more important than survival, right? Like virtue and competence and being a good example and making life better for yourself and the people around you through virtue and competence. That's more important than survival. It's more important than happiness. It's more important than comfort. It's more important than all those things. And so when things are going really poorly, the goal for us and what we want for our kids is be the good example, be the good person, be virtuous, be the hero, sacrifice for other people. And who knows how much good that can do. And that's what you'll do if you're a good parent.
Be the hero, not the villain. If you do chat with your kids, leave us a comment. Let us know what you said, how it went. Stay good out there. Hi, I'm Dr. Jeremy Dale.
Hi, I'm Ronnie West.
This is Good Parents, Good Children.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, at least if you're a good parent.